Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Lola Adebogan, and I am West Marketing and Admin Assistant. Our topic today is using a coach approach on diversity and inclusion issues, presented by the wonderful Betty Motwari, who's an executive leadership coach and consultant. If you have any questions for Betty as we go through the presentation, please feel free to submit them in the Q&A box, not the regular chat box. However, do feel free to use the regular chat box to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your business. And as always, this webinar is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing. You'll receive an email tomorrow at this time with the link to the recording. With that, I'll pass it over to Betty to now begin the presentation.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much, Lola. Hello, all the ladies. I wish I could see you in person. I don't seem to see anyone on gallery, but welcome. And I'd just like for you to introduce yourself so that I can know who is in the webinar. And then we'll get started with the content in a few minutes. So I just welcome you to just pop in your name and say hello and what you do so that I can have a sense of who's on here. Thank you. Hi, Kathy. Hi, Harmet. And if you can put your business besides your name, that would be fantastic too. Molly from Rock and Bloom Brand Agency. Awesome. Welcome, Molly. Brenda, BSC Consulting. Denise. Kathleen. Mark, Focus Mediation and Consulting. Megan from B-Scope 2 Studio Salon. So just as you continue to check in on the chat box, I'd just like to maybe give a frame and to welcome you to this presentation on how to use a coach approach to enhance diversity and inclusion. And before we start, I would just like to acknowledge that we are situated in Treaty 4 and Treaty 6, the traditional homelands of the Métis, and I respectfully acknowledge the indigenous peoples of these lands in which we work, live, and play. So just wanted to give that acknowledgement and also state that February is Black History Month. So as a Black woman, and I celebrate and I acknowledge that we pause to think about the acknowledgements of Black people in Canada. So I just wanted to acknowledge that before we get started. So the objectives of the webinar today are to review the fundamental concepts of diversity and inclusion and see how we can use the 3A coach approach model. This is a model that I've developed and I use it for coaching and mentoring in order to build inclusive spaces where people can feel a sense of belonging and
Hi,
foster
Betty.
custom. Hello.
Oh, so sorry. I don't think your screen is shared.
I beg your pardon?
Your screen
Yeah.
is not being shared right now. Is that on purpose?
Nope. I'll go back.
Wonderful.
Okay. Thank you so much. So we'll just review the objectives again. As we are going to review the fundamental concepts of diversity and inclusion and show how to apply the 3A coach approach model. And this is a model that I have developed for coaching, for mentoring, because it creates transformational conversations. The reason for using this in your business, and of course for approaching the diversity and inclusion issue, can have various rationales. For me, I thought that the best way I can think about it is to create customer loyalty. Because if people feel included, if the space that you're in, diverse people come and they feel that they're part of it, it definitely engenders that customer loyalty. So that is one of the key considerations, but not the only one. And we are going to discuss that as we go along. So I'll start by just explaining the dimension of diversity. And diversity is pretty much differences, the differences that we all bring. As you can see from this slide, some of the differences are very visible and others are not. The personality and internal dimensions are not visible for all to see. Unless you are really curious about the person, you'd never know their gender identity nowadays, or maybe where they were born. I can say that I was born in Kenya, in Africa, but looking at me, some people think I come from Jamaica, from Nigeria. So it's whatever I present externally is not what is internal. So we have to be curious to ask some of these dimensions that are internal. The external dimensions, again, some of them are pretty obvious and some of them you have to be curious about. And that's why I really wanted to introduce the coach approach, because it brings in the curiosity. It brings in the interest in a way that does not cause any microaggressions. Organizational dynamics is another dimension of our diversity, and of course, global dimensions. And as business owners now, I know we realize that even if we are local in Saskatchewan, we are definitely competing with global forces. So again, when you think about diversity, think about all the dimensions that people could present and your customers present. So some of the groups that are protected under Canadian human rights are Indigenous people, racialized people, women and gender minorities, people with disabilities, older people, and LGBTQ2+ peoples. Again, the reason why is because they are visible minorities, and some of them are invisible minorities, like the LGBTQ2+. You'd never know that unless you really asked or created a safe space so that people can feel a sense of safety to be able to disclose. So we are talking about these groups from the perspective of legislation. But I think we need to go beyond that, because what motivates us to create a diverse and inclusive environment is not just so that we can comply with the minimum standards, but I believe it's so that we can build a just society. And yeah, as part of, living in a very diverse environment. So I'll talk about unconscious bias because it's something that has come up lately, and it's especially with our neighbors down south. We can see examples of, especially in May with the death of George Floyd, it's become a subject of discussion, and for various reasons, because we're all born with an unconscious bias. Every one of us is born with an unconscious bias, and it's promoted through things like media, our upbringing, some of the things we may have heard. So it's something that we have, and we are just created to be able to really be instinctive and protect ourselves in the presence of something that looks threatening or dangerous. So if you're not accustomed to different cultures or different ways of being, whenever you see something unfamiliar, it's very, very normal for someone to react in that way. The reason why we need to really be conscious of it is not so that we can say we don't have the bias, but just so that we can acknowledge it and nip it in the bud. So when it goes unchecked, that's why you see some of the things, the tragic things happening, or it escalates into building stereotypes and, of course, racism. So again, the point of raising this is to just acknowledge that each and every one has a bias, but that does not mean that we need to act in the way our biases promote us to do. If we are fearful, one of the things we can do is just take a step back and say, you know what, is that based out of fear, or is that based out of a reason, or just out of fear? And how can I learn about these other groups so that I can mitigate the fear that comes, or I can mitigate some of the assumptions that I've held for a long time. So again, the point of this is just to to help us acknowledge that we have them and we can work around them. So diversity is something that happens. It's very natural, but inclusion has to be built. So as leaders, as business leaders, this is where we really step in and create respectful and inclusive spaces. So inclusion is the state of being valued, of being respected and supported. It's about focusing on the needs of others to create conditions that foster a sense of belonging. And inclusion is really reflected in how we handle our business every day. So in the lingo of D&I, we say that diversity is the mix, inclusion is getting the mix to work together. So again, the imperative here is to acknowledge our diversity, acknowledge the diverse markets our clients represent, and then figure out how to really be inclusive. This is where your leadership comes in. How do I reflect that inclusion in my space? How do I reflect that inclusion in how I handle my clients? How do I reflect inclusion even in the artifacts in the business that I'm running? So people do see a sense of themselves. They always feel like they belong. But if they don't see or cannot resonate with anything in the environment, they definitely feel that they do not belong. So in terms of inclusion, these are the character traits that have been provided by Deloitte and Touche. Deloitte has done lots of research on this in this space, and they resonate for me personally because this is a journey, it is not a destination. We are on a journey to be more inclusive. We have not arrived, but it's always about being reflective about how we can increase that competence. It definitely does take courage. It takes courage to create inclusive spaces. Lately, been talking about how to stand against any forms of discrimination. And if you're in an environment that is not challenged, it does take courage for you to stand up and speak against it in every form, whether it's a small or a big thing. But going against the status quo always demands our courage. It does take commitment because as leaders, if we are indeed to model that, it will not be by just doing one thing. It is a persistent journey. It's a commitment to doing that for the long haul. And also takes the recognition that we do have biases, but the biases don't need to limit us. So again, I'm trying to reinforce the fact that the biases don't have to be the limiting factor. We just need to acknowledge and then address them accordingly. Curiosity for me is a big thing because we need to be open to new ideas. We need to be open to learning about different backgrounds. We need to be open to know that we do not know everything. And majority of what we know, especially from races that are not our own or people who are different from ourselves, it may come from sources that are not legitimate. So again, and one person cannot represent a whole group of people. So curiosity for me is big, and genuine curiosity in really trying to understand so that we can bridge the differences. Cultural competence and intelligence, again, it comes by knowing that just because I think this way doesn't mean everybody in the world has to think the same way. And acknowledging that as a diverse community, people have different ways of being, and it's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's about how do you flex and how do you actually find common ground. It's not negating yours, it's not villainizing other ways of being. It's about looking for being curious and knowing that everyone is different, and it's the beauty that makes that diversity strong. And collaboration, we cannot do this on our own. We definitely need to build teams. If you're a team leader, it's incumbent on you as a leader to foster the same philosophy with your team. So as a business owner, if my philosophy is to treat people with dignity and respect, I do expect everyone on my team to play game. It can't be something that I or you do by yourself, but it's something that can be developed and fostered on a team so that together you are stronger. So the next definition here will be on equity. And equity is really moving towards social justice. As you can see from this slide, sorry, we do have, three scenarios here. And the last scenario that has removed the fence so that everyone can see the game is what we call equity or true social justice. So the first one, if you give everybody the same block, not recognizing that some are shorter, you've been equal, you've tried to really be equal, to treat everyone equally, but still one person does not see the game. In the second image, you see that there is some attempt at making it equitable, acknowledging that the shorter person needs 2 blocks so that they can be able to see the game. And that's huge. That's huge. And that's where the space of equity comes. It's recognizing that not everyone starts from the same space, and some people may require just a little bit more to be able to be on the level playing field with others. And the third one now is about challenging those systems that are in place. We've been talking about systemic racism. Those are the structures that are in place that prevent or that create the fence in the first place. So social justice is about removing those blockages so that people can actually see the game without having those barriers to begin with. So those are the key motivations in the space of diversity and inclusion. Again, acknowledging that diversity is a fact and we are all diverse and we need to appreciate that. Inclusion, that is the leadership imperative. And then equity, it's about knowing and acknowledging that not everybody has the same opportunities or not everybody had the same starting point, and moving towards social justice. So I have a polling question here, and I'd like us to just reflect on our drivers for this space. And Lola is going to launch a poll, and just need to, I know it is hard because all those reasons are legitimate and they are all very valid. But I'd like you to just select the one that resonates for you the most as the key driver for you with regards to diversity and inclusion. So Lola, I'll just ask you to launch that poll.
Yes, the poll has been launched. Can you see it on your side?
Yes, I
Okay,
can.
wonderful.
I believe maybe now we should close the poll. Shouldn't take too long.
Okay.
Are you able to show us the results, Lola?
Yes.
All right. Can everyone see the results?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. So as we can see, 50% of you said it's dignity, to affirm the inherent value and dignity of every person. And the next was competence, to improve skills, knowledge, and ability. Excellent. And social justice, to be an agent of creating an equitable society. Those are all excellent reasons for you to engage in this space, for sure. I do believe that they are, with dignity, and that's the starting place, acknowledging that everybody, it needs to be accorded the same value. And then of course, we need to build our skills and knowledge in engaging in this space. And some of us are more or have a bent towards social justice. So thank you so much for those reasons. I appreciate that. So I wanted us to think about, how do we create transformational conversations? Every day we are confronted with opportunities to enhance inclusion, to enhance equity, to enhance diversity. And this is something that happens in conversations all the time. And as a coach, I'm always very conscious that every conversation I have is an opportunity for planting seeds for transformation. So I wanted to invite you to just engage with this framework because what it can do, and I'll kind of go through how we can go through the three phases very quickly. It builds higher self-awareness of our own cultural worldview and attitudes towards cultural differences. It also builds knowledge of different cultural practices and worldviews, not just our own. It develops a more accepting and inclusive mindset, and it promotes communication and helps us to lead in a more inclusive manner. So the model has three big chunks. The first one is awareness, and awareness is always the starting block for any change. So unless you're aware of what needs to change, then it's hard to change. So awareness is a fundamental starting place, and most of it is self-awareness, because if you're more self-aware, then you'll be able to figure out, and also if you raise other people's self-awareness, they'll be able to figure out what needs to change. Alignment is about really aligning our own musings, our own realizations and learnings against what is very core to us. Each and every one of you, you're business owners, and you do have values that you hold very strongly. You do have philosophies that you want to promote. So again, being able to check in and ask yourself, how am I showing up, and how is that aligning to my core values and to my core principles? I think that is a key part then of leading into action or activating the next step in terms of what do I need to do then? Because without taking action, ideas will always be in our head, and they're not going to move us in the direction that we want, either for us personally or for our businesses. So again, taking that step, without taking a step, it just becomes an idea. Unless it matures, of course, you don't have to act every time, but I always think that something needs to be activated, something needs to be actioned once you have that haha. Otherwise, it doesn't create the transformational potential that it has. So applying the 3A model to yourself, on the awareness stage, you can ask, what are my cultural preferences? What are my core values? And what values can I flex? So when I talk about core values, they're the values that are so fundamental and frame who you are. Flex are the things that, you know what, I can give them up because I want to be more inclusive. And asking yourself about what unconscious biases, do you hold? Because again, I did say that every one of us has them. I have them. And how am I showing up? So I'll just give an example for myself in terms of what are my cultural preferences. I grew up in Kenya, and I came to North America about 30 years ago. And when I came to Canada, it was a very different culture than the one I was brought up in. But I also realized that I grew up in a country that was colonized by the British. So most of the attitudes that I gained were very much colonial ways of being. And, we're talking about indigenization and how we need to decolonize. I was almost in the same space where I wasn't quite sure what was true, authentic of my Kenyan culture, what was the colonial culture that I grew up in. And now I was, faced with learning a different culture in North America. So for me, it has been a journey of trying to pull apart what is really core, what gives me meaning, because there was such a confusion of different cultures, and they're not all bad. I'm not villainizing any of them, but is really trying to truly understand, what are the values that made me who I am. And it's an ongoing journey. So that self-reflection really needs to take place, because I think I took some things for granted, that some of the cultural values I held were traditional core values of the Kenyan culture, but they were not. And there was nothing wrong with that. It's accepting the beauty of all the cultures that we are exposed to, and know the ones that are so core to who you are. in the alignment phase is figuring out, in terms of self-reflection, and again, we reflect all the time, how can I reflect my intentions and authentic self in how I show up? So if I really value, and we talked about valuing the inherent dignity of each and every person, that we can ask ourselves, how am I reflecting this in my behavior? If anyone watched my behavior, would they actually draw the same conclusion? So some of these things, do come with some intentionality. I have noticed in my own journey that just because I think some things, I don't manifest them in behavior. So I need to be intentional in manifesting them in behavior, because people judge you not for what you are thinking, but for how you show up. So again, it's about connecting the thoughts, connecting your intentions, and being very deliberate in manifesting that in behavior. And I did talk about the actions again. What do I need to improve? What actions do I need to do to improve inclusion? Because I said inclusion is a behavior here that we can actually control. We have influence on how we behave. We have influence on how we can create inclusive spaces. So again, what little action can I take to actually demonstrate that I'm an inclusive leader? And that will vary, based on yourself, your background, your business, what you do, the people you're surrounded with, the people you want to surround you. That is all relative. But again, just having this as a framework. Again, frameworks, for me, I use frameworks to think. I can be able to put my thoughts into a framework and move around it quickly. And the 3A process helps me to figure out how to move through a thought process, in a very efficient way. I can move from awareness, what am I feeling? What am I sensing? What am I thinking about this? To how does this align with my core values? How does it challenge me? How does it, what gaps does it illuminate in terms of what I profess and how I act? And how do I need to act? Because as leaders and as business leaders, you have noticed that the journey is about closing the gap between your intentions and your actions. And creating that alignment is what creates that integrity. And then small steps. This is a revolutionary journey for sure. It's never achieved in one step. As I've been journeying with it, with my clients and with myself for a long time, I do acknowledge it is a lifelong journey. I'm just going to pause there before we move on to coaching others and just get your reactions in terms of, is this making sense to you? And you can just put on the chat line. And how do you see it enhancing the continuous growth in this area or any other area for that matter? So just watch for the chat. If you have any questions and comments, I'll give you a few minutes to do that. So Denise says very applicable and worthwhile. Thank you. Yes, I love the 3A model. Thanks, Tracy. Good to see you here. Brenda Bears, it is rare, and I have thought about coaching myself, a new process for me. Thanks, Brenda. I hope this will be useful for you. Awareness seems to be the starting point for many personal and professional journeys for growth. Absolutely, Gwen. That's where we all start. Self-awareness is a fundamental principle of change. So again, thank you for that feedback. I'm just going to transition to how you can use this now to actually coach other people. So if you're a business owner and you have a colleague or someone on your team that definitely demonstrates something that goes against your value of diversity and inclusion, you can use the same to bring the awareness. Because one thing I've noticed is that the issue of diversity and inclusion, people do things not out of malice, in my opinion. I know there's a very small percentage uh, that acts out of malice and insensitivity. But in my experience, most people do things because they don't know what to do, and it's an awkward space. Sometimes the awkwardness just creates awkward behaviors. So it's nothing to kind of judge people about. It's not about judgment, but it's about raising awareness of what's going on for them so that you can create a learning space and a space for growth instead of a state of judgment. So if you see something, or you can ask, what's going on for you? By creating a safe space for them to actually uh, be able to be authentic. And that's the other thing I didn't mention, is that this has to be done with lots of psychological safety. People are not going to be vulnerable if they're not psychologically safe, and if they feel that what they are going to share is not going to be used in a positive way. So within that context of a safe space, you can ask, what is going on for you? And then the person can just share their story. What values and beliefs do you hold in relation to XYZ? Again, you're trying to raise their awareness. You're coming from the starting point that they're doing this not because not out of malice, but they're doing it because either they are ignorant, or they have the wrong information, or any of the above. So again, coming from a place of real curiosity and trying to enhance people's learning journey, I think is what can promote these conversations to be meaningful, and not judging what you hear. Because again, when you're in the diversity and inclusion space, I have friends from different walks of life, and they've shared with me some of the things that were shared at their dinner table. And they do say, well, this is what we heard and that's what we believe, but now we know different. And you cannot judge that. They just were exposed to, again, a stereotype that they may have believed, but it's not a fact. So again, it's about really creating that safety for people to be authentic, and for you to support their learning journey. In the alignment phase, it's about you promoting what you believe. Again, our business is dedicated to respecting the dignity of everyone who works in here. And that can, mean different things to different people. But again, you have to be able to put a line in the sand against what you believe, and then ask, what do you need to adjust in order to actively demonstrate the behavior? Again, the conversation needs to be intentional, and it is action oriented. That's why I said that the 3A is very action oriented, and it's intentional change. And then the action would be, what actions will you take, and by when, and what will success look like to you? So, as you know, very easy to put in your mind the building blocks, the awareness. You're raising awareness for yourself or for other people. Alignment is about really aligning to what is meaningful for you, what are the fundamentals for you. And action is about taking action so that this doesn't just become an idea, but it becomes something that can actually produce growth and change. So I'm just going to pause there and just ask about your comfort level in using this process with other people. Thanks, Brenda. I've done a fair coaching, and clients absolutely That makes perfect sense. Tracy, I believe I can use this process in coaching my clients who come from different walks of life. I like the model. Thank you so much for your feedback. I do know Tracy personally, and I know we belong to the ICF Saskatchewan chapter. So for the ones who are coaches, you know this is a coach approach, not the old full enchilada of coaching through ICF. But again, we're just trying to create this as a way of being without, demanding their own coaching kind of certification process. So thank you so much for that feedback. And now I'm just going to talk about a little bit about privilege, and not to open the can of worms, but there was a lot about white privilege that was talked about in the summer. And I believe all of us hold some privilege. When we think about the social situations and we think about, the haves and the have-nots, there's always something that you may have that someone else might not have. So I do believe that the subject of privilege doesn't always just start and end with white privilege, but all of us can reflect on the privileges we have in society. And the question is to challenge ourselves in terms of using it to champion other people, and being aware of it not as a burden or a source of guilt. No one, chose to be born white or black or brown. We were born how we were born. There's nothing to feel guilty about that. We just need to look at it as an opportunity to learn and be responsible so that we can work toward a more just and inclusive world. And I think this is where the discussion of being an ally comes in. Because if you are in a situation where you are interacting with other people who are of marginalized communities, if you have any privilege, whether it's white privilege or whether it's able-bodied privilege or whether it's cis privilege, you can use that as a champion for justice, of social justice, and for promoting the equity. And anyone in the marginalized groups definitely acknowledge that having an ally really helps in creating a inclusive space. Sometimes it's very difficult for someone from the marginalized group to really advocate for their rights. But if you are in a position where you can promote that, where you can amplify their voices, then it becomes much easier. And it creates for them a sense of inclusion because someone else from the majority society understands what they are going through. And that is a key part of creating an inclusive space. So in terms of the strategy of creating diversity and inclusion, it really has to be tied to your mission and the goals of your business, led with competence and care, and implemented in a sustainable manner. Again, the values of diversity and inclusion come from the top. If the leader of the business, if the leader of the organization is not modeling or communicating that this is actually important, then it will be very difficult to really create systemic change. So that's why, people acknowledge that they value diversity in their mission statements or in their value statements, so that all the employees can be cognizant of the fact that it's not something that is a by the way, but it's very core to the mission. This is a framework that I found, and it's extremely systematic. And for any one of you who would like to pursue this on a micro, meso, or macro level, it creates a really good roadmap for figuring out where do you start. And the next thing that I really like about it is that it's scalable. So you can start as little as you need to. It doesn't mean that it has to be for huge organizations. You can customize it to the level of the organization that you have. And it's free. That's the other thing though. It is free, and they're very generous with the information that they have. And I've put the website there. So you start with a foundation in terms of what is your vision, what is the leadership, what is the structure. So the foundation drives the strategy. And even as a business owner, as a solo business owner, I can still have a vision for diversity in my consulting and coaching company. I can still kind of figure out, what I need and create that in my mission statement. Because once I declare that in my foundational strategy, then it opens up different perspectives and different avenues, and the clients I may pursue, and the kind of work that might want to do. So again, it's very scalable to whatever level of business that you have. Then the next one is internal. It's about attracting and retaining people with diverse backgrounds. And we looked at the the various levels of diversity. Why is it important to actually work with diversity? I'll just ask that question. Why is it important? From, of course, um, just a common sense point of view, but in your own business, is this something that you would want to do? Proactively attract people from different backgrounds. What is the benefit? It makes for better service delivery, absolutely. That's Brenda. Yeah, Brenda, you are bang on. It does make for better service delivery. Gwen says diversity brings different perspectives and insights. Absolutely, absolutely. So we are not doing tokenism in this perspective. Just from what I see from Brenda and Gwen, just having people who are diverse is not just tokenism to say, oh, I have, people from different backgrounds, but it's because of a core value that they have something to bring. This business will be stronger because they are bringing different perspectives. They are going to enhance service delivery. So again, it's very much driven from a fundamental point of view that it's not about tokenism, or it's about real results. And diversity and inclusion has definitely gained lots of momentum in terms of innovation. If you want your businesses to be innovative, again, it is better if you have diverse people working in it and diverse opinions. That's what will bring uh, that ingenuity and creativity. So again, you look at the internal benchmarks and then the external benchmarks. How are you listening and serving your society? I already noted that in Saskatchewan, we are very diverse. We are very, very diverse, and I love it. One thing I love is the restaurants. I can go to any ethnic restaurant every week. I'll have a different ethnic restaurant to eat in. So again, how are you integrating all those factors, knowing the diversity that we have? I just talked about food, but there's so many other ways that we can think about, what does the diversity of our community, what are the implications of that for my business? Social responsibility, marketing and supplier diversity. Are you attracting people from different ethnic backgrounds to be your supplier base? And what benefits does that bring? And then the bridging elements are communications, I think would be one that you definitely have to communicate and share stories, assessing and figuring out your sustainability plan. So this is what bridges across all the three dimensions. So again, it's a very detailed framework, and it's supported by assessment instruments. I'll just show you, for instance, the categories under these 4 groups. Underneath, you can see it is delineated. And for each of them, there is an assessment. So when I got introduced to this and when I applied it in my organization, you started in terms of a current state assessment. Where do you think you are? Are you in the inactive mode? You haven't even started thinking about that. Are you in the reactive mode, or are you proactive, progressive, or best practice? So there's a continuum of where you could be placed. One of the things that I need to, declare is that it's in some areas we were completely inactive. And instead of, feeling shame, how could we, is just acknowledging this is just a starting place. So, and, doing it with different stakeholders, because everyone has a different perspective, would be great, just so that you can see there's a core, there's consensus around where you are at. But so you do the current state assessment, and then you figure out for yourself in 2 years, 3 years, where do you want to be? And again, you, if you are inactive, you just want to be in reactive, and that's okay. It's just your journey. And again, this is one journey that when I consult with big organizations, there's no need for shame or blame. We are starting somewhere, and there's some areas where organizations are doing best practice. You could be all over the map. It's acknowledging where you are and making some intentional goals and creating targets. So if you target to be in the reactive, for instance, with this one of vision and strategy, if right now there's no D&I vision, maybe in a year, there could be, one. And then reactive stage, 1.3 says if a D&I strategy exists, it is limited to human resource functions only. You can have develop one for a very limited group, or it could be a target to also include disability access or age discrimination. So again, it's all about the target you choose that are relevant to your industry. So just to recap what I've said, you do a current state assessment and a future state assessment. You are the one to create the timeline, and it doesn't have to be grandiose. It can be just one item, but at least it is a systematic way to keep improving and to keep building that culture of diversity and inclusion. So it helps in terms of creating the depth and breadth and integrated scope of D&I practices. As you see, if you're ever interested in that, it's huge. So it has both breadth and depth, and it helps you assess current state and determine strategy and also measure progress. So I'll stop there and invite questions. I know I've covered lots of subjects, but I'm happy to take any and all questions over the things that we've talked about in the last 40 minutes or so. So Jill says, I'm good at reflecting in response to events that challenge my unconscious biases, but what can I do to be proactive, to identify what I don't know, understand? That's an awesome question, Jill. And the fact that you reflect on your responses is a wonderful, wonderful thing. What you can do to be proactive, these are some of my suggestions, is to read up on some of the issues to do with diversity and inclusion, especially the terminology or just literature on the subject. It might cue you in on some of the things that you can be proactive about, and I would be more than happy to send you some reading material. Another way is just to talk to people about it. Talk to people that you can trust in terms of how you understand and what triggers you, in a way that at least if you can accept it in the conscious moment, and if you're talking with someone who's safe, next time it comes, then you're more prepared. It's not something that you'll be thinking, oh my God, that happened again. But and again, journaling, some of those things, events that are happening. So again, really reading up, doing your homework, reading up on some of, on the diversity and inclusion space, talking to safe people, just being very vulnerable and very authentic about that. Those, there's some situations that really trigger me, and this is why. And trace back to where that could have started. And then debunk the myth or debunk the assumption. Again, it's about really tracing the beginning and why you hold that belief in a space where you're not judged. I will say that again, someone who doesn't judge you and someone who can really give you the space to really reflect. Or if you don't have that, journal it, but just go to the beginning, where it started, and ask yourself, is this true? Is it a myth? There's no fact to support it. So I just definitely need to embrace a more curious stance and giving yourself permission to do that. And say, I am choosing to embrace a more curious stance than a judgmental stance, because the things I may have believed do not serve me anymore. So it's about what beliefs and values don't serve you anymore and need to go and need to be let go. So it's an ongoing journey, Jill, but I hope that is helpful. So Brenda asks, how often should management being checking in with staff on state of diversity? Brenda, that it really matters in terms of how aggressive you want to be with this. I would say that in your annual planning, you can definitely declare that that's something that you are, and then checking in as often as maybe quarterly or monthly. So it really depends on how aggressive and if you are educating versus if you're remediating. So what I say by that is, if you're educating and really want to raise a consciousness, that could be something that you have, educational sessions, because I always believe that a culture change starts with awareness and education. You can't hold people accountable for something that they do not know. So you have to create a common base of knowledge, common base of awareness, so that they know what we are talking about. So I'll give you an example. Just the other week, we started talking about issues to do with LGBTQ plus and how we need to learn their terminology. So you can see people signing is, I am she, her. You refer me to she, her. So if you are not all aligned in what does that even mean? Where are people sharing their pronouns? Then there could be that differences of approach. So again, it really starts with whether it's just raising the awareness, assuming that you're starting from scratch and you need to all build up that education, or if you're remediating something has happened, and you need to call it out and need to correct the behavior, then the frequency and the intensity of that as well will be commensurate to the goals that you have for your organization. So I hope I've answered that. If not, I just continue chatting in the chat box and I'll see your response. Gwen says that non-judgmental piece is so important. Without a non-judgmental acceptance of the person, not the behavior, the reflection and insight so necessary to develop awareness become extremely difficult. Absolutely, Gwen. That is so bang on. Yeah, if you're holding a judgment, you cannot be able to embrace the curiosity and just, yeah, and the other person will also feel it, so I completely agree with your comment there, Gwen. You really need to embrace curiosity than judgment. Judgment interferes with interactions, with the emotional resonance, with the sense of safety. So absolutely, yeah, I agree with you 100%. So we have a few more minutes for any other questions or comments.
Okay. If there are no more questions or comments, I'll just make the closing remarks, and if they pop up, then we can read. Oh, there's another one right now.
Thank you, Gwen. I appreciate that. Denise, awareness of privilege and understanding how it's an opportunity to champion other people is so great. Absolutely, Denise. We are all privileged in one area, and let's use it as a force for good. Appreciate that. Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Tracy.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for that excellent presentation and for volunteering your time. Obviously, everyone really loved it based on the comments in the chat box. And thanks for all of you who took time out of your busy days to join us. Don't forget to check our events page at west.ca/events to register for our upcoming webinars. We have 2 webinars for next week. Our business growth luncheon is on Wednesday. And then we have a webinar on Friday about financial wellness that you definitely do not want to miss. So make sure that you register for both of those events. If there are no other questions, I will now be ending this webinar, but thank you so much, Betty, for coming and giving us a presentation today.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate our time together. You're very interactive. I really enjoyed the energy. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. Goodbye.